What's up, you guys? Good Scapegoat here with episode number 4 of Blackboard. This is it's a little bit about deck building, but it's mainly about a quote I've heard. So one of the best quotes I've ever heard in this game comes from a friend of mine you guys may be familiar with, Paul Blake. If you guys remember the dude that topped, I think, 2 regionals with 60-card Fire Fist? Yeah, that's him. So he was to Fire Fist what Storm is to Noble Knights. Like, hell, he's the reason I started playing Trans-Modified Gravekeepers. Like, he straight up gave me the idea, because he was talking to me and a couple friends about how good he felt Trans-Modify was. And if you look at the card, you know, it's been splashed in Gravekeepers, it's been splashed in Fire Fist, it's been splashed in Melodious, it's been splashed in a good amount of rogue decks, at least if you give the card half a chance. But something that he said to me that I've always remembered and that I've really carried with me through a lot of my deck ideas was this: make your deck unfair. Meaning behind this is that, you know, the meta is always going to be unfair. It's your job just to keep up. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, there is no such thing as a fair deck anymore. Like, there's fair cards, but no, fair deck, no, bullshit. You need to be unfair or you're probably going to lose. Nobody goes into a tournament, at least anymore, thinking, how can I win while giving my opponent the best chance of winning in response? Like, no. Like, that wasn't even a thing, like, when Diamond Dude Turbo was around. You know what I mean? I remember the creator of Diamond Dude Turbo, he said something kind of like that in response to everybody hating Tyler Tabman because he played Final Countdown at YCS. But there's such things as fair cards, but there is no such thing as a fair deck. Perfect example, Moon Mirror Shield. Completely fair card. Yes, it stops the battle phase from being really that much of an issue, but very seldom do we see in this game, like, 3 monsters versus 3 monsters, and the opponent's board gets broken by their 3 monsters getting attacked over. No, like, one gets popped, one gets shuffled back with Castell, and maybe the third one gets attacked over. But I'm just saying, much more often than not, like, it's not attacks that are really breaking opponent's setups. So Moon Mirror Shield helps your monster avoid getting run over in battle, but if your opponent is going off, attacking over your monster is very likely what they didn't have in mind in the first place. So is Moon Mirror Shield suddenly a bad card? Of course not. Play it in stun decks, where you either have to disrupt your opponent's plays and fight back next turn, or even better, play it on monsters that can lock your opponent down completely. Obvious example, Barrier Statues. Love that deck to death. Summon Dyna, equip Moon Mirror Shield, set a bribe, game. Like, hell, I play 3 in my new variant of Jowgen Field Control. Cards that aren't spoon-fed to archetypes very likely aren't going to be all that great. It's up to you, especially if you're a rogue or anti-meta player, to make them all that great. The same applies for rogue decks, anti-meta decks, or just new strategy ideas in general. You think Madolches were all that great just because they were tiramisu spam? No, the deck is terrible, and I will say that, and I will take the beating for saying that. They are terrible if you play them that way. But if you run cards like Thunder King, Valor, Maxi, and other cards that were anti-meta, let's say at the time, like Iron Wall and Kaiku, well, Kaiku's still good right now, but my point remains valid. You can apparently top 32 Nationals in 2013. So with this format, you have people trying to make the most solid turn 1 board they possibly can. Like, usually at least one card has a once per turn negation ability, with the other monsters either being high attacks, floaters, both, or something along those lines, like Exceeds or whatever. Know what counters those really well? Kaiju. When DDD goes first, it makes Curse King and Hope Harbinger. It's pretty fun to tribute Hope Harbinger for a Kaiju, and then summon Psyblock or turn off Curse King, play the field spell, summon a different Kaiju to your side of the field, do other shenanigans, then completely disrupt your opponent's setup, and usually taking control of the game more often than not beyond repair. I saw a comment on Slim's video about pendulums where someone complained about how the meta was all about spam. And sure, there's a good amount of truth to that statement. I'm not saying it's all about spam, but let's be real, turn 1 fields are the kind of format we have right now, and that is irrefutable. And yes, it's annoying, but it's very easy to counter more often than not. Has anyone noticed that if you break that turn 1 setup, your opponent more often than not is not going to come back? Notice that with the DDD setup I mentioned earlier, if they have 2 to 3 monsters on the board, but only like 1, maybe 2 cards in hand, and all the relevant shit in their graveyard's been banished to make that setup, for fuck's sakes, a raw sphere mode could break that setup, and then basically prevent your opponent from coming back unless they top deck their Stratos, and even then, it's pretty limited in terms of plays, like in comparison to what they could have done in the first place. You know, as far as with these types of formats in particular, you know what's fun to do? Play decks like Barrier Statues and Kaiju. Shit that either disrupts the fields they make, or stops them from making them in the first place. Statue, set 5, is hilarious, and what the fuck's your opponent going to do about it? Hell, play Evil Swarm and make Ophion first turn. You know what I mean? Game. Like, at least much more often than not. You're going to have some trouble with PK Fire still, but that's never really gone away. But like it kind of reminds me, I'm a fan of UFC. You know what I mean? And I remember Frank Mir, who was one of their premier heavyweight, not so much premier heavyweights, but he's a future UFC Hall of Famer, at least very likely. And he said he didn't really have a problem fighting people that were like on steroids, for instance. He goes, yeah, because the first round's going to be tough, and they're probably going to hit like a motherfucker, but after that, they're pretty much gassed out. You know, it's all about playing around what your opponent is good at. I'm talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Pretty much anything competitive. It's all about playing around what your opponent's good at and then exploiting on where your opponent is lacking. You know, when it comes to DDDs, literally summoning a barrier statue is usually going to win you the game. Maybe some normal summons are above 1200, but you should at least have some kind of protection for the Dyna, meaning that Dyna, Moon Mirror, Shield, Bribe, that's probably game. You know what I mean? So this all goes back to what I've said previously, and this is what I've said in past videos, and I still stand by this, and I always will, which is that this game is all about adaptation. You want to succeed? Adapt. How does the phrase go? Adapt or die. So you know what? That's how it goes. Adapt or die. Take your pick. So that's about it, you guys. Hope you enjoyed episode 4. This is something I'm wanting to talk about for a while. I just never really knew how to phrase it correctly. So make your deck unfair. I love that. I always remember that. So that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.